Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We'd like to now enter into panel session 3, Path to a Startup Nation, the Role of Finance in Fostering the New Business. Simultaneous interpretation is available for this session. Please make use of
simultaneous interpretation service on channel 2. それではご登壇者の皆様方
Then I would like to introduce the speakers who have joined us for this panel. Mr. MASATO KANEDA, Operating Officer, Deputy Head of Retail and Business Banking Division, Mizuho Bank Limited. And Executive Officer of the Tokyo Stock Exchange Incorporated, Mr. KENTARO HAYASHI. And from Globis Capital Partners, partner, Mr. SATOSHI FUKUSHIMA. And from Copenhagen Fintech, CEO, Mr. Thomas KROGH JENSEN, joins us online. And the moderator is from Nikkei Incorporated, Mr. KENJIRO SUZUKI. Mr. Suzuki, please go ahead. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is KENJIRO Suzuki from Nikkei Incorporated. And today, we will engage in discussion over the path to a startup nation, the role of finance in fostering the new business. This panel session will take place over an hour. I would also like to offer a brief words of introduction of the panelists. Mr. KANEDA from Mizuho Bank is currently the Deputy Head of Retail and Business Banking Division, and he's the Operating Officer at Mizuho Bank Limited. I've had the opportunity to view his profile. He has also studied overseas in the United States, and he has come into contact with startups. And having returned to Japan, he has been dedicated to startups. From his youthful days, he has also been responsible for established companies, and he has also been engaged in deep startups. And from the perspective of the banking institutions, we would like to hear about how banks can support startups and create an ecosystem. And from TSC, Tokyo Stock Exchange, Mr. Kentaro Hayashi also joins us. And of course, I'm sure all of you are aware about Tokyo Stock Exchange. Mr. Hayashi has been responsible for promoting listing of companies, and hence, given that mandate, nurturing startups, and also in the growth companies, how to administer growth to create an attractive capital market is an area he has worked upon, hearing the views of market players to move ahead with reform. We would like to hear about his views on issues and how he's engaging with investors. And Mr. Fukushima, for independent venture capital, as such a venture capital, he has served as partner of Globis Capital Partners. And I've had the pleasure of interviewing him on several occasions in the past. Globis Capital Partners has also conducted investment in IT, but also he has also worked on healthcare startups as well. And Globis has seen its fund grow, and also global activities have also been a part of their core considerations, and therefore we would like to hear about how he feels about the circumstances surrounding Japanese startup and how we will be able to nurture Japanese startups. And as a venture capital company investor, how can we move ahead? And from overseas, we are joined by CEO of Copenhagen Fintech, Mr. Thomas KROGH JENSEN. And Thomas has established a non-profit award-winning innovation hub founded in 2016 in Denmark. Not only that, for venture capitals investing in fintech, this is also an area of his interest. He has started such a company. And as we consider Japan's ecosystem, of course, we hear the examples of the US and also Silicon Valley. But the Nordic region has also generated many unicorns, and that is very well known. And also in global rollout, we understand that activities are really brisk. And therefore, from Thomas, we'd like to hear about initiatives taken in the Nordic region, and also given the situation here in Japan, what advice can he offer and views we would like to hear. And just by way of self-introduction, I'm with Nikkei Inc. I joined 2003, and I've been working as a reporter for 20 years now. In the first 10 years, I've been covering listed companies and also the equity market. And from about 10 years ago, I've also covered startups and also small and medium-sized enterprises as well. And as I cover startups within Nikkei, there is a team that covers startup companies, and I've been serving as a supervisor coordinator for that team. And through this session today, I am ready to learn much more. Well then, that will serve as a way of introduction. And then, from this point onwards, I would like to hear from the panelists by way of self-introduction. And also, in fostering Japanese startups, we'd like to hear about the efforts they are making and what they feel are challenges. And I'd like to hear from Kaneda-san.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. My name is KANEDA from Mizuho Bank. So just briefly, I'd like to introduce myself. Since I joined this bank, it's more than 25 years. Corporate banking and investment banking were my focus. And as you can see here, not only in Tokyo, but internationally, I have more than 10 years of experience, Hong Kong, Boston, Singapore. And when I was a child, I was in Cairo. And right now, in 2021, I came back to Japan from Singapore, and I focus on the startup support in Japan. Of course, as a bank, we have these loans, transaction banking, and financial investing, equity investing, and also we have an IPOs and M&A activities in our investment bank. And later, I'd like to go into more details. We have a lot of transactions with enterprises. With open innovation, we are focusing on startups so that we can create new businesses. So what are the initiatives and challenges? Major 3 points are here. The first one, well, the major one is that we want to make it big. The point is, as a bank, to what extent we can supply risk money and how much transaction we can support. And we have a lot of SMEs and large enterprise customers, including outside of Japan. So we would like to connect those organizations. That's true. And we have overseas branches as well. So globally, to what extent we can contribute to the market. Those are three very important points for Mizuho. And our startup initiative in Mizuho, well, we are very much focusing on this. And we have 5,000 startup companies we are covering. And nationwide, from Sapporo to the southern area, we have 300 plus client service professionals. And sorry, this is very small, but innovative startup coordination department. We have this specific frontline department, and also the regional offices and credit office for innovative startups. So we have research branches as well. So we have such cooperations internally as well. And we have a lot of stakeholders in communities, and those two are two of them. So we have connections with VCs and academia very closely. And also we have loans we provide, and we do IPOs and M&As, securities company in our group, and also open innovation of enterprises, and we support startups in that regard as well. As I mentioned before, risk money, as you can see here, senior loans to equity, we have a full lineup approach to provide services. In terms of loans, well, this is our major business as a bank, 60% increase of the loans for startups, and venture debt fund. We have Mizuho Capital. This is an in-house VC, venture capital. And around here, we have the fintech companies, and we have this debt fund as well. And the equity part, well, we have Mizuho Capital, but we have different organizations right now. And from the bank, we have the transition credit and also value creation credit, and we support equity, and also CVC. We focus on the fintech companies as well in our CVC. And also, Mizuho Securities handle M&As and IPOs. And for not only for startups, VCs are very important partners for us. Domestically, we have about 40 VCs, with which we have LP investment. And right now, CVCs are very active in Japan. And we focus on supporting the establishment of CVCs. And the recent examples, this is case number one. We provide loans as a company for startups. So we do not take the loans by ourselves. We do syndicated loan as well. And this is a Digital Grid Corporation. This is a power startup. And we have provided about 56 billion yen as an arranger. And also, we are going to have a bank meeting for the mid-level startup next week. And also sustainability-related startups, we are going to originate for them as well. So we have a lot of cases. Case two is collaboration with the large corporations. M-Salon is a program we have. This is what we call M-Salon. And we have the membership of 4,200 or so startups and growth companies. And also we have bridging activities. VCs are involved, and we have a lot of stakeholders, and we connect all of them. And we have the discussion meetings and pitch events and business meetings, and also seminars for management. We have about 50 events per year. And one of the examples here is, this is a company called Photo Election Seoul Inc. This was born from Nagoya University. This is a startup company. We collaborated with Ushio Inc. So what's written here is so much in detail, so I'm not going to detail. go to detail, but we have the gallium nitride they are using, and they have the semiconductor photocathode e-beam, and this is their technology for semiconductor inspection with the high luminance. So the testing process is more efficient compared to the conventional methods. Ushio is very famous for photomasking technology. So we are collaborating together with another enterprise for joint investment. The point here is we need to create a supply chain. So upstream we have TSMC, Samsung, and Intel, and from Japan, from other countries, from enterprises to SMEs, there is a great big supply chain for semiconductor industry, and we are involved. The last one, and this is our global reach. 37 countries, 100 locations. We have such locations as well to support Japanese startups globally. We are contributing, and we have partners, and as a bank and as securities companies, we provide a lot of financial services to support startups. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kaneda. And then we'd like to hear from Mr. Hayashi, initiative taken by TSE and also issues and challenges. Thank you for the kind introduction. My name is Hayashi from the Tokyo Stock Exchange. My main responsibilities are promotion and marketing for new listings. There's really not a lot I can say in the way of self-introduction. 1984, very close by, I've joined TSE, and 30 years have transpired in a single company. First of all, I would like to describe where I'm speaking from. We are a stock exchange, and therefore we offer services surrounding IPO, but this is not an all-powerful tool. My hope is that, of course, it is an important tool, and my hope is that more startups will use the IPO as an opportunity to raise funds for growth. But I always feel that increasing the number of listed companies should not become an end of itself. It is important to reinforce the IPO ecosystem, and therefore, from that perspective, I would like to talk about the priorities and initiatives that have been taken by the Tokyo Stock Exchange. First of all, the question arises as to how the TSE can contribute to strengthening the ecosystem. There are three focal points, and of these, the most important is what we see to the right, achieving sustainable growth post-listing. And needless to say, growth depends on the efforts of the individual startups. And the TSE will try to create an environment that encourages such growth. And the second is integrate the center. The IPO process will function stably only if secondary investors can maintain healthy expectations for sustainable growth after listing. And the part of of course, IPO funds that maybe Fukushima-san has offered should be recovered and then allocated to new investment targets. And therefore, it is an important subsystem. And therefore, from TSE perspective, based on the changes in the ecosystem, we are constantly required to update the system and process. And the third is to the right. And this is to boost the funding provision pre-listing, as Kaneko-san from Mizuho has just mentioned. It has now come to take a longer time for a startup to establish its business, and during which time a substantial amount of upfront investments is necessary, and therefore we need to consider what kind of a role that TSE can play. Now, we're working on this while keeping an eye on whether the three functions are meshing properly and whether the entire system is functioning efficiently and in a balanced manner. And this is what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. In this context, let me share the data on the current domestic IPOs here in Japan, the first of which is the number of newly listed companies. This is a graph I'm sure you're very familiar with. The Tokyo Stock Exchange began to actively support the development of startups with the establishment of the mother's market in 1999 following the collapse of the dot-com bubble economy in the United States. And this has registered an IPO boom in Japan, and 200 companies have been listed in a certain year. In 2009, the number of newly listed companies declined. However, thereafter, there has been recovery, and as of recent, we have seen smooth listing. And we say, of course, a smooth listing, there are also pros and cons. When the investment target grows and the venture capital tries to recoup its investment, the market could shrink, which will mean that the opportunity for exit could be lost, and which means the uncertainties will increase. And therefore, we need to have a stable and also predictable IPO market, especially for a pre-IPO fund procurement. And on the other hand, as we move forward, it is important to note that, of course, the supply of pre-IPO funds will surge, and therefore the resilience and flexibility of the IPO market will also become an issue. The IPO process needs to be updated to reflect the changes in the environment. The slide on this page shows the average state of newly listed companies in the year 2023 from several perspectives. I would like to divert your attention to the amount of funds raised. The median funds raised at the time of the IPO in the standard market and growth market is about 2 billion yen. We may not be able to, of course, generalize due to the characteristics of the industry, but this is often referred to as being very small. On our understanding, on the U.S. NASDAQ, the median amount of the IPO financing is just under $10 million, indicating more than half of all IPOs are small-scale listings. The issue at heart is whether individual startups are able to choose an IPO at the optimal timing. And thirdly, in Japan, the location of newly listed companies tend to be concentrated in Tokyo. This harbors two issues that need to be addressed. First, this inhibits the regional expansion of business in the domestic landscape. Startups generate jobs and offer solutions to social problems, and hence is all the more important for regional economies. And therefore, we must expand the opportunity for startups in the regions outside Tokyo to take advantage of growth through IPOs. And second is issue from national considerations. The government 5-year startup development plan aims to make Japan the largest startup hub in Asia. Unlike a huge centrally controlled market in our neighboring country, we have an open financial market, and therefore we like to see foreign startups enter Japan in search of talent, or for foreign entrepreneurs to start businesses in Japan, and for venture capitalists from home and abroad actively investing funds in strategy. And we believe that this should become the norm. And hence, the IPO process, which constitutes the latter stages in the ecosystem and the secondary market post-listing, will also need to accommodate these developments, and improvements are called for. The next slide shows the exchange's recent initiatives in light of the current realities that I've just made mention of. I will not go into details here, but let me say that we are implementing initiatives from three perspectives: promoting growth post-listing, updating the IPO process, and diversifying pre-listing funding methods. We will continue to study revisions that are necessary through discussions with market participants with the aim of strengthening the startup ecosystem. And we hope to deliver some useful insights where we can from today's session as we learn from the experience in the Nordic countries. Finally, I would like to reiterate, the stock exchange places importance on the growth of startups after they go public. And when the U.S. company Apple, the ever-famous name that everyone knows about, when Apple went public, its market cap was $1.1 billion, which today is topping 3 trillion yen. That's a 3,000-fold increase, which is the result of growth achieved post-listing. The same can be said for Microsoft and Amazon, as well as Japan's Keyence, Nidec, and also Fast Retailing, which went public around the same time, and they have grown substantially post-listing. And therefore, none of these were unicorns according to the current definition. And therefore, the aim of startup ecosystem is not necessarily to produce unicorns, but a unicorn or otherwise. The goal should be to use IPO as a stepping stone to growth and to achieve sustained increase in corporate value over the long term, to return added value to society and to nurture companies that enrich society. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you very much, Mr. Hayashi. Now we'd like to interview Fukushima-san.
Thank you very much. I am from Globis Capital Partners. My name is Fukushima. As Mr. Suzuki mentioned, we support startup companies by investing them. So Globis, you might have heard of this name. Corporate trainings and education, and also MBA school, the biggest one in Japan. We are running all of them. And we are Globis Capital Partners. We are investing into startup companies. We have the history of 30 years. This is one of the oldest, most traditional venture capital in Japan. And in terms of the capital, we are one of the biggest in the group. So the capital comes from your pension and insurance. So we obtain such capital for management. So I would like to say your money is already invested into startup companies indirectly, so you are shareholders indirectly. So how the startup companies are growing really is going to relate to increase of your capital in the future. And I myself, more than 10 years, I am in this business, and I used to work for an international securities company. And from our fund, we have a lot of investments. Some of them are B2B, and some of them are B2C consumers. And also we have IT-related products and services. We have a lot of products and services we invest into, but mostly our major focus is IT or some technology to contribute to the growth of this society. And probably you are using this Mercari is a company logo. So after Mercari, the startup environment in Japan has really transformed, and I'd like to talk about this later as well. And domestically, we have a lot of industries. And when you look at only startup ecosystem in the last 10 years, it has grown more than 10 times as much. So this is an industry. Such a drastic growth in Japan. Do we have some other industries which are growing like this in Japan? This is a new industry. However, compared to the other asset classes in Japan, the speed of the growth is the fastest, probably. That means unless this industry continues to grow, we cannot have new industries in Japan. And we call them unicorns. More than 100 billion yen of the capital. Those are the benchmarks. And as I mentioned before, we have these Mercari. The logo is here. In 2018, they were listed on Tokyo Stock Exchange. And right now, they have 300 billion yen, and they used to be 6 billion yen. So, well, this is the only big unicorns that VC supported in Japan. Even if you're running 100 meters, well, one day someone breaks the record of 10 seconds, and then there will be a lot of followers. And it's the same in this industry. After Mercari, we have more and more listed companies with more than 100 billion yen. So someone breaks the barrier, and there will be a lot of followers, and this is one of the examples. So 10 times as much in 10 years and more than 100 billion yen in capital. So the ecosystem to support startups has evolved as well. Japanese market, to some extent, has been mature to support startups, and that is our phase. The issue is how not to stop at this momentum. We have to be a tailwind for startups so that we can continue supporting them. So this is what we are doing. We support startup companies. So beyond Japan, when they go abroad, how we can support them is important. This is not important for Japanese investors. Well, last week I was in the US. From the investors from outside of Japan, we need to attract them to increase the capital in Japan. That's the first point. And another one, for example, you graduated from Tokyo University 30 years ago. You might be working as the government official, or some time ago, maybe you were working at Goldman Sachs and McKinsey. Well, but how we can grow the talent pool in the startup ecosystem, that's very important. So we are supporting in that regard as well. In summary, we have the environment already. So now we have people who can run in 9 seconds. And can we have a bigger company right now? In Japan, we have a mature market, a big market already. Well, this might be, we have pros and cons. Well, you can achieve 100 billion, but you need to be global if you want to reach 500 billion yen. And Nordic companies, for example, some of them are 1 trillion yen, 10 trillion yen. So how do you break the next barrier? It's important. So we are in the next phase right now. Thank you very much. Fukushima-san, thank you very much. So now I'd like to give the microphone to JENSEN-san, Copenhagen Fintech. What are you doing? And as 3 people presented right now, if you have any comments on those 3, please.
And thank you so much. Very honored to be here and talk a little bit about what we are doing in the Nordics. Very impressive presentations before me. It's good to hear Mizuho and your initiatives in open innovation, very important, and very impressive the work you're doing in both the VC and the CVC space. Also very interesting to hear the Tokyo Stock Exchange about building the IPO ecosystem, and finally also very impressive Globis and your very impressive track record. Your support to startups is super important, and it's really great to hear the growth of the Japanese ecosystem for startups. So 3 really impressive presentations, and I'm very honored to be sharing a little bit of insights to what we do here in the Nordics when it comes to building a startup ecosystem. Mind you, we are on what I will be sharing now with my slides is focused a little bit from our experience in building a fintech startup ecosystem here. So just be sharing a little bit about Copenhagen Fintech as an organization. We are a non-for-profit and a public-private partnerships. We have a lot of different partnerships around the world. Some of, or many of the logos you would know, also a Japanese logo here, our partner in Japan, Nomura Research Institute. So we've been working with Japan for quite some time and Japanese partners and banks for quite some time. We have a lot of institutional investors as partners, also 60 institutional investors. We run different startup programs to support and help. And in general, of course, Nordic countries being small countries in a small region, we are very focused on building a global network to help our companies scale. So many of our companies are born global from the beginning. I come from a long background in financial services and founded Copenhagen Fintech, which is based in Copenhagen, obviously, but works within the 5 Nordic countries with developing the startup ecosystem. As you can see here, McKinsey have also pointed out that Denmark and Sweden, as examples here when it comes to Europe, has been in the forefront of especially fintech innovation in Europe. This is another index saying a little bit around Denmark and Sweden again, being top on the rankings of developing entrepreneurial ecosystem within fintech. So the big questions is here, why care? And I think as some of the previous speakers has already mentioned here, it's very much about economic growth and job creation. If you take Denmark as an example, we have, since we started in 2016, the startups we have worked with and created in Denmark have created 5,000 jobs. I'm well aware that that number in a Japanese context might seem small, but for a smaller country, that is actually a lot of jobs that's been created over a fairly short amount of time. We've been able to attract, just in this fintech vertical, tech vertical, attract more than 1 billion euros in foreign investments into these companies. And I think if you look at the distribution of investments, 70 to 80% comes from investors outside of the Nordics, which also help these companies scale. And then it's a lot about, of course, the global recognition of being a startup hub, but it's also a lot around talent attraction. So being able to attract the best global talent to build companies inside of the Nordics. I think what is also interesting, and especially maybe a learning in a Japanese context, but then when it comes to Nordics, a lot of innovation don't necessarily only come from big corporation, but actually also comes from very specialized clusters such as ours, innovation clusters. And if you look at the numbers for that and the case for these clusters, I won't go through them all, but I think what is interesting here is that it has a massive impact. You can see some of the numbers here on job creation, on economic growth, and especially when it comes to creating global winners, what they here call global frontier firms. There's a massive growth from clusters creating these kind of companies by making them work together. These are some of the logos you might know of unicorns coming out of the Nordic fintech ecosystem by Danish and Nordic founders. So what is it that is important and what is important to focus on? I already mentioned talent is a critical component of building and startup ecosystem. Of course, access to capital, and that is not only venture capital, but that is also government funding, and of course, angel investors. And then, of course, creating customer demand, a strong local demand, and an open ecosystem that are willing to engage. For fintech especially, it's a lot about collaboration with big corporates. So big corporates leaning in and collaborating with startups. It's about policy, it's about regulation, and use regulation proactively, and creating an open, competitive market space. So what have we done? I think what we have defined was some key metrics of job creation, attraction of foreign investments, of partnerships, and tracking those very meticulously. It's a lot about funding, and we are not only government funded or private funded. It's a mix of funding and also philanthropic funding. It's about building a strong global community and attract, and then of course embrace a global outlook of the cluster. So it's also very much around focus on your key strength. So fintech is definitely one of the key strengths of the Nordics, among with several others such as sustainability and impact startups. It's about access to smart capital, not only capital in general, but capital that comes with cleverness in that tech vertical you work with. And it's about strengthening the ties between research institutions, startups, and the industry. If you want to know more, there's a report on the Nordic ecosystem and different numbers on how we work with and the impact of how we work with the ecosystem from our report here. So that was I think my 7 minutes of recommendations of how to build, and especially an early stage, but also a later stage startup ecosystem. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So next, since all of you made presentations, based on your presentations, we would like to discuss challenges that startup companies have and the solutions you can suggest. So as Mr. Jensen mentioned, fundraising is very important, and as was mentioned by Mr. Fukushima, in these 10 years, the investment money has become 10 times as much. It's expanding. So as I cover startup companies right now, the difficulty of using equity as a tool is it's increasing, and also venture debt. Well, the loans and debts are increasing, and in Japan, startup companies do not have enough knowledge about it. So first, I'd like to ask you, when you look at the fundraising in Japan, what kind of challenges do you see, and do you have any solutions? If any, could you please share with us? First, Kaneda-san. Yes. I belong to a bank, so I'd like to talk about providing loans. So we provide loans to startup companies. So the screening process is different from large enterprises because they don't have any experience and history. Even if they have history, it's a short history. So we cannot really screen based on their background. So we have to assume that they are growing going forward. To make it simple, we have to make sure that we can get the return, if you can repay the money to us as well, because that's the debt. So you have to really use your imagination. For example, for deep tech, you have due diligence of the technologies, and as in Fukushima-san's company, you have venture capital and capitalists who might give us some opinions, and supply chain, value chain of deep techs, for example, R&D people can tell us about if there's any significance of them having business, and what's the point of the production processes. So we refer to many different opinions in our assumption. And for example, we have a lot of listed stocks, and we have a lot of metrics we can use. For example, cash multiple and how much top line from how much revenue, and we can analyze from the PLs for senior loans as well. we can verify their capability to repay. So you can use a lot of tools to provide loans to startup companies. And actually, a lot of companies, a lot of banks are providing loans to startup companies. So overall, banking industry, when you look at the overall industry, still we are in the process of growing. It's only a very small portion of the portfolio as a bank. And the risk to return is not that bad because pricing, we have overbanking situation, but not in this industry yet. So that means, well, there's very, very few defaults. And when I look at my portfolio, I am not really concerned about any of the portfolio companies. It's not really zero risk, but the pricing is not bad. So I think it's possible to support. So, as I mentioned before, the traditional view of the screening is something we cannot use for startup companies. So we have to use our knowledge. We have to cooperate with each other to use our knowledge to keep the volume, keep certain volume, to keep them in our balance sheet. Thank you very much. So, Mr. Hayashi, in your slide, you talked about fundraising in Japan is about 2 billion yen, as you mentioned. So what's the background? What's your opinion? And at the time of IPO, to increase the capital you can raise, what do they have to do?
Thank you very much. First of all, as a major assumption, unlike Mr. Kaneda, we are not on the side by which we offer capital. We are managing the market, and through the TSE, of course, the supplier of capital are the investors. Well then, for the investors, what is the readiness to offer funds or capital? That will depend on the valuation at the point of IPO, as well as a business plan, and how much funding is required for the business plan to be executed. So it's very difficult to generalize to say there is one certain specific factor or reason. And from Fukushima-san, we heard that if there is one company that achieves a breakthrough, then there could be a string of high-level listings or startups, and that was very encouraging to hear. Small IPOs to succeed is already here. So making good use of the ecosystem, we have found that several companies have made good use of the IPO listing. But on the other hand, what is the challenge that we're confronted by? For 2 billion or 5 billion IPOs, when this is smooth going, when we think about the 5-year startup plan, it is said that the fund that is required will be now increased by tenfold. But then, are we going to see such companies emerge in the market? We have to ensure that the market is ready to accommodate these type of companies, and that would be the challenge ahead. Well then, what can be done? What can TSE do? Well, there's really not a lot that we can do. However, on a day-to-day basis, to ensure that there's communication with the secondary market players, so that pre-posting, companies can go on to the next stage. And of course, we will do what we can. And that will be, of course, our immediate challenge.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to ask you, Mr. Fukushima, among other venture capitals in Japan, your management level is very large. Compared to the Western countries' VCs, still your scale is not very big. And accordingly, Japanese startups, before being listed, the fundraising scheme should be limited. That's what I hear. So what is the status quo, and how do you view the situation? And as Globis, to expand the fund, what kind of initiatives do you have? Compared to the US, startup investment versus GDP is about 1/3 to 1/5. Only the US is a different world, so you cannot really compare yourself with the US. The trend is an increase, so we have to make sure that it doesn't decrease. That is the most important point. For example, 2021-22, IT economy was very good in the US, and in 2023, the investment money became half of this. However, in Japan, it's about 15 to 20% decrease. So, of course, TSE as well. The market is very lenient. Loan providers as well. So we have to cherish, we have to value this kind of environment. And this industry is different from the other industry development. We have to have a different approach. For example, when you look at politics and government administration, their approach is to make a system that in which no one is left behind. But as I mentioned before, startups should be global, or they have to gain focus in Japan. So it's like forming a professional sport team. That's the activity to develop startup ecosystem. So it's very important to expand this industry. But as I mentioned, like 9-second runner, you have to make a lot of success stories. And then some companies might achieve being listed. That's 10 billion yen. So for example, a large company wants to cooperate with a startup company. Well, 4 or 5 years ago, open innovation became the term. So suppose they have negotiations to start business together, but some startups are negotiable. So this is one step forward as a large enterprise to start negotiating with easier to negotiate startups. But sometimes they select startups which they cannot negotiate very well. So tough and strong partners, champion startups, and World Series startups, and those are the startups that they have to cooperate with, and then they can have sustainable growth. Thank you. So 3 panelists talked about Japanese situation. So Mr. Jensen, as you listen to those 3, would you compare Nordic countries? For example, if you have any initiatives you want to present, or do you have some comments on the challenges in Japan?
Yes, so I very much agree with my fellow panelist from Globis that it's one of the places to start is very much with the focus on the success stories. And if we see the entrepreneurial journey, hopefully there will be IPOs and exits, and the money from those, not only the story, but the money from those exits and IPOs will go back and be reinvested in the ecosystem. I think as was also mentioned, the US is a very different story, but I think we have proven in the Nordics that you can, there's another way of building that ecosystem through collaboration and partnerships and a very open and collaborative environment. So I think what I have learned from being in Japan several times and from what we've done in the Nordics is that there's not one single thing, but there's many different things to focus on. And to mention a few of those, I would say, especially in the highly regulated industries, such as financial services, it's very much around regulation and regulation being not only pro-regulating, but also pro-stimulating innovation and stimulating foreign entry into the country. It's around regulations also creating tax incentives for investors to place some of their capital into startups and into venture funds. It's very much around, I think, also encouraging not only domestic VC funds, but attracting foreign VC funds that can help the startups in their scaling journey, both in the early stages, but also in the later stages. It's very much about creating an open ecosystem that can attract talent. In the early stages, founders and technical talent. In the later stages, it's commercial talent that can drive the scaling of these companies beyond Japan, even beyond Asia. So that specific, I think what we have seen in the Nordics, that specific talent that knows how to scale a company from being 500 people to being 5,000 people or 15,000 people. I think that's a very different kind of talent, and that is also very much available from outside of the ecosystem. So I think there's not one silver bullet to fix it. There's several things to do, and it's all intertwined, and they all need to play together against the common goal of creating growth and jobs for society.
Thank you very much. As Mr. Jensen said, right now, being open and global, those are keywords. We have about 5 minutes left. So in the end, when you think about ecosystem, startup ecosystem in Japan, and when Japan wants to be a startup country, what do we have to do? Well, small IPO was pointed out. That's what you said, Mr. Hayashi. So after being listed, continuously companies have to grow. And money should be allocated to asset management. And for pension management, they are going to improve. And also we can create new industries. And to do so, what do we have to do? You can talk about your initiatives and 5-year plan to develop startup companies is an approach by the government. So if you have any request to the government or anything, and just very briefly from Mr. Kaneda, please. Yes, just very briefly. When Japanese startups grow globally, they can use our networks, or they can be supported by a lot of networks by Japanese companies. Well, looking back at what we have done, we have to have a more cross-sector approach, cross-sectorial approach, because how to go abroad is different depending on the government approach. B2C and market practices, and we have a lot of things we have to consider. And also, well, the space might be the biggest market right now. Battery materials startup is in Japan, for example. We want to support this company. So what kind of companies do they have in the US and Europe? We have to have a cross-sectorial approach. It's not about rolling up or anything. What kind of supply chains they can create, and what kind of partnerships they can create. So we don't have to focus on certain sectors, but we would like to have a cross sectorial approach to support those startups. And that's something we would like to do for the challenge. Thank you very much, Ms. Hayashi. So as TSE, lately, you're focusing on global approaches and you're developing deep techs. So going forward, what's your focus? Just briefly, please.
Thank you very much. As Fukushima-san mentioned about nurturing startup, it's like nurturing global top players. That's how I expressed it. And which would mean not necessarily Japan originated. It could be Nordic originated or Asia originated talent becoming top players and competing from the Japanese market. And that is the type of an ecosystem we would like to build. And we are also working with KANEDA-san Mizuho Bank. We want to achieve a global domain, and not necessarily Japan originated, but from outside of Japan, starting startups here in Japan, and then growing through collaboration with Japanese companies. That is the kind of scheme that we will hope to be able to create, and we have started to work on this as of April. And of course, we have indicated Asia Startup Hub, and as you can see, we have the focus is on Asia, partners Thomas-san, but we are looking at a market in which global players can be active from Japan.
Thank you very much. Fukushima-san. Yes, I have 2 points. For those of you who are not directly involved in startup companies, well, including you, as citizens of Japan, I think you have 2 approaches for startup companies. The first one, you have to accept failures. For example, 6% of the investment, that means 6 out of 100 companies can obtain 60% of the overall return. So one failure does not mean the startup company is not good. You have to look at the comprehensive picture. I really hope you can look at this to comprehensively to support them. That's one. And also, the flip side of that is you need to look at strong teams. For example, Los Angeles Dodgers, they recruit players using free trade system. They are not really permanent employer. So liquidity of the employment, it should be accepted. Otherwise, we cannot create a strong team or global team that is strong, that comes from Japan. So we have to be very flexible to look at those points. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, flexibility of employment, that is very important as well. Well, I really wish we had more time to discuss, but I'm sorry, the time has come to close this meeting, so we would like to close the session right now. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone. Kaneda-san, Hayashi-san, Fukushima-san, and Mr. Jensen, and the moderator, Suzuki-san, thank you very much. Once again, we would like to give them a big round of applause. Thank you very much.